And so, excuse me, that might be in a social studies class, it might look like, okay, today we're going to make sure when you turn in your answers that all of your past tense verbs are correct. And that might be something, so then you could write up on the board, language objective today, past tense verbs, or regular past tense verbs, or whatever it is. And you can do that in all different content areas. And that can be helpful not only for your English language learners, but for your other students as well. Supplementary material, and I know that you know this already for multiple reasons, but charts, graphs, pictures worth 1,000 words a lot of times. Manipulatives, multimedia, demonstrations are especially important for English language learners. And something I mentioned before, assigning study buddies. You know, if you have a student that comes into your classroom who speaks very little English, they're going to choose to sit in the very far back of the room and try to fly under the radar. But if you pair them up with one of your students, you know, somebody who's a compassionate person, most students that I've met who, you know, are helpful human beings, and they're more than happy to work with an English language learner. Especially students who are in like National Honor Society, Rotary Club, athletics. A lot of those students are really helpful students, and they really want to help this student become acclimated to your class. And that can be something where you have the ESL student and the study buddy come in after school and work together on something, or just during the class, so that that student can take the time to say, okay, now we have to take out our books. Okay, now we have to look at the back of the chapter. Now we have to look at this map. Or, well, he said you have to add this. So then you have somebody in your class taking on that role instead of you necessarily having to be on top of that while you're trying to facilitate an entire classroom. So presenting new information in the context of old information. I know that I really hardly ever did this when I was teaching, but I think it's really important. It's something that I've definitely learned in terms of saying, okay, remember yesterday we talked about this situation. And so today we're going to add on to that, or tell you what happened next, or at the same time, over here, this was happening. So using what they know to present new information, giving it some sort of a context. Any questions or comments about some of those strategies?
I've worked with classes before where we had students, especially that were refugee students, that knew very little English, if any. What is your opinion about having having other students translate for them? Because they were to the point where I would need another student who knew some English they spoke Swahili, and then this was in Lansing, we couldn't find anyone in the entire Lansing school district that spoke Swahili at the time. And so we would have one of the other students translate for that student instructions. Is that a good strategy, or would you say no?
The native language is your friend. Don't resist it. They're going to learn English at some point in time. The question is, are you going to focus so much on them learning English that they don't learn concepts? Or are you going to say, okay, you know, we know you're going to learn English, you're going to be in our school system for another 4 years, let's learn a concept. And so I would say absolutely. Any kind of native language resources you have. I know specifically with Swahili, there are so many free online translation, you know, little software programs, or just on Google that you can find that are very helpful. And so that's definitely something that I did. You know, when one year I had 17 Russian speakers who had literally been in the United States for like 2 days before they started school. And I knew absolutely no Russian. And so I got online, and I was typing who, what, when, where, how, bathroom, sit down, be quiet. You know, I was finding all these words. And so I would write them out, you know, and I found out there were several errors. But it was helpful because I could hold up my sign that said be quiet and sit down, even though I couldn't, you know, say anything in Russian. So definitely use those resources. As much as possible. And I would say even draw on a university. If you're within driving distance of a college or university where you're teaching, most likely you can find some kinds of resources. We have a number of Swahili speakers in our education PhD program. We have some Burmese language speakers. And so that's something where an ESL teacher at Pattonville actually contacted the school and was able to find somebody from Burma to work with the Burmese refugee students. So there are definitely resources out there, and you can use those. I think what happens a lot of times is people think, well, if you're using their language, they're never going to learn English. But what you can do is, okay, so you've got this concept, you understand it in your head in this language. Now let's give you the English vocabulary to attach. But it's really hard to learn that language if they don't understand the concept in and of itself. And so getting that concept across in a language they understand and then attaching English vocabulary words to it can be very helpful. So, and you'll find people who completely disagree with what I just said. But I know, as somebody who was working in a K-12 situation, that was something that made such a difference. And it's very validating for a student because it gives them a chance at success. Imagine, you know, your own self, if you've ever been in another country completely surrounded with a different language or something that you're not familiar with. It can be helpful to have just even a few words that you can latch onto and understand. Other comments or questions thus far? Okay, so we're going to kind of do talking about some testing here. And again, a lot of information here. You can kind of go through that on your own. I think one of the most important things that I've learned about testing is that a lot of students don't know test-taking vocabulary. And so teaching them words like explain, name, helping them understand that when you say, you know, why does this happen, that you're looking for more than just a one-word answer. Those kinds of things can be very helpful for students in terms of taking a test. Things like compare and contrast, define, think about. It's amazing how we don't oftentimes ask what we really mean to ask in an asking kind of way. We say, think about the progressive era, and then we'll ask a question, and not actually saying, what is this about the progressive era that we want to know? In terms of accommodations for test taking, I think one of the key things is more time, giving students more time. That's obviously something that would be helpful if you're not you know, reading at the grade level at which the test is written. And something I would challenge you to consider are group and collaborative assessments. And I know a lot of times if you've been taught in a very traditional manner, you probably think, that's not how we do tests in the United States, right? Everybody has to do their own, so we know exactly what everybody knows. But one of the things one of the social studies teachers at my school did is he started doing these collaborative tests with the ESL students. And so he would take a group of 3 or 4 of them, he would choose the groups, which they were always trying to like, you know, come on, Mr. McGowan, I want to be in a group with so-and-so. They know it really good, you know. But he would choose the groups and he'd bring them in after school, he'd bring a bag of chips or whatever, and he would sit down with them and he would essentially ask them, work through the entire test with them. And they, like, what would happen is I was able to watch several of these happen. And I mean, one student would say something in answer and the other kid would correct them or use a different word. And you could really get a very clear picture of how much those students were able to get out of the class. And so that's something that I really challenge you to think about is, okay, here's your test, but you're going to work on that together. And so I think it can give you a very clear picture of what students know. And the other thing about assessments and tests that I would really encourage you to think about is don't keep what's on the test a secret. You know, I would oftentimes ask a teacher for a test so that I could review with the students, and then this one teacher said to me one time, well, then they're going to know what's on the test. Right. That's probably a good thing, right? We want students to know what's going to be on the test, what they're going to be held accountable for. And that's especially important for English language learners because they oftentimes don't have those inference skills that, you know, you're sitting in a class and you say, okay, everything I said today is going to be on the class lecture, or on the test, everything from my lecture. English language learners probably didn't catch the majority of what you said in class. And so being very explicit and clear about what's on the test and giving students an opportunity to know that ahead of time so that they can make sure that what they know conceptually can match up with what they know linguistically. Different ways to modify tests. I think one of the most helpful things, and I don't actually know if it's on here, but I know that we did quite a bit, especially for English language learners who maybe didn't get actual English language services anymore, students